Hi, I'm Mark from Property Ventures. Welcome to this week's New Zealand Property Podcast, where we interview the property expert around New Zealand. Okay, welcome back to the latest New Zealand Property Podcast and video series, and today we're talking about new builds, and we have our very popular guest from Gilligan Rowan Associates, Matthew Gilligan. So welcome back, Matthew.
Thank you, Mark.
Had a busy few weeks.
I have. I've got 6 houses in construction at the moment, and 3 of them are relocatable houses. And on one site, and on the other site, there's 2 new builds and a lift and shift. We've moved the existing house to the back of the site to make room for the 2 new houses on the front.
Great.
And there's an awful lot of work that goes into it, so that keeps me out of trouble. And I've got about 16 similar sites queued behind that for myself or for clients. So
there you go. So a bit of work for a guy that owns a large business and doing his part-time stuff. So that's good. And in fact, we're probably the next time I'll get you back, we'll actually be talking about that a wee bit more and how you're helping some other clients as well. So that'll be the next time we get you back.
Subdivision and build, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone wants even to know about that in the meantime, feel free to come along and ask us. But before we get into the new builds today, I'll give Matthew a chance to talk about Wednesday night. There's a special evening coming up at Alizé Racecourse with yourself and the BNZ economist Tony Alexander. So, big event last year. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so Tony Alexander, of course, is the BNZ chief economist, and he's very popular with investors because he seems to be more interested in property and sees property as a productive part of the economy. We've got a housing shortage. It's a legitimate thing, building and owning property and providing supply of property to the market. And he of all the economists, does seem to be quite pro-property. A lot of the others, the tone of them is property's not productive. New Zealanders' fascination with house price inflation is bad for the nation. So they all seem to be quite down on property. But Tony's pro-property, and he's a great economist for tracking metrics that relate to property. So I really value his opinion. I've taken a lot of advice from him over the years. This will be the 3rd event we've run with him.
Right.
And I'm always excited to hear what he's got to say because he's got very up-to-date information. He's plugged into Reserve Bank people, he's plugged into government people, and so he often knows what's going on in the background. He gets an inkling on what's going on in budgets before they come out, that sort of stuff. So this being an election year and the budget due next month, it'll be interesting to hear what Tony's got to say.
Absolutely.
Coming off the back of that.
And yourself, of course.
Yeah, and I'll be talking as always. I'll probably have 30 minutes, 40 minutes, something like that. And my presentation is going to be about what I think makes money in this environment and the risks of this environment, and perhaps a few points in relation to the changing tax environment, some evolving issues there. But look, a theme of Gilligan Row is that if you're in front of someone here, we practice what we preach. So I'm a property guy. I've got 30 plus properties personally in Auckland, 11 active property developments, 7 for clients, 18 on the go at the moment. So that makes us real, and we borrow money, we set up companies, trusts, and so when we speak about something we're passionate about, that we have genuine personal experience in, and makes us good advisors. So that this event on Wednesday next week with Tony is going to be really good because you're going to get the chief economist from the BNZ talking about the environment, the election, the budget, and all things related to property metrics and his view of what's going to happen to interest rates and the environment. And I'll of course be talking about more tangible things like strategies that are making money in this environment and tax changes and so forth, and just my view of what's going to happen in the market, because I've got skin in the game. And like everybody, I read in the New Zealand Herald this morning some inflationary bold statement that could Auckland be the next Perth with a 40% house price implosion?
Right.
Which of course is nonsense. Auckland is not Perth. We've got such a diverse employment base, massive pent-up demand. We don't overbuild houses like they do in Australia in oversupply. We've got positive population growth because we are a good business environment, so you can get jobs here, so people come here for employment. The average incomes here are higher. Everything about Auckland is different to Perth, but you know, these are sorts of things that we'll be discussing with Tony next week, because if you've got informed opinions backed by data and deeper knowledge of the industry, you can make more money. And you've got to resist the temptation to be listening to the likes of the journalists in the New Zealand Herald who just want to sell newspapers. And they're either talking about things that make you very fearful or things that make you very greedy. Look at this guy, he got rich out of all of this property he's been doing. Look at this guy, he's gone broke. You know, here's fear. Or could the market melt down and we'll all lose money? That's fear. So it's either fear or greed.
I read anything in the Herald, it's always, what angle is the journalist coming from? Why did they want to, you know, why have they written the article? And it's not necessarily the truth. It's an angle. An angle.
Yeah, and the angle is, let's get an emotive response out of the readership. Do they like it? Do they hate it? Is it real? Is it not? They don't care. They just sell newspapers.
I remember a year ago, Tony had some pretty strong comments on views on what was going to happen, and he's been pretty well on the button. So I'm looking forward to catching up and seeing how it goes Wednesday night. And of course, we'll be at the back of the room there also, the Auckland team of Property Ventures. And if you want to get to that, either reply to this if you've seen this on this email today, or go to the GRA events, gra.co.nz to the events part, and it's on there to register. You can still register, I think, for a few more days yet.
That's right, yeah. Just register.
About 500 odd people. Yeah,
register online at GRA. I think we limited it to 500 this year. We got 900 last year, which was crazy. And it was too big. We didn't have the sound set up properly, and so we're limiting it to 500 this year. So just book online, www.gra.co.nz. Mark, I'm sure that some of my clients will be in your podcasts, and not all of my clients understand what it is that you do and how they can do business with you. Do you want to share that with us?
Oh, sure. Thanks for the warning, Matt. I mean, I could do how long we got, but I mean, what we can do for your clients is there's two things. You know, we used to be a buyer's agency only, so we used to work for the buyer, finding them a property. There's various reasons why that's not our main model now. Some people think that's all we do still. Yes. And in fact, we still do have a handful of people we do work for, working for them directly, finding a property. Okay,
so you were property finders.
Yep.
But my observation of you now is I've sent you quite a few clients and you've just sold their houses.
Yep.
So
and that's primarily
mainstream REA.
And that's primarily what we do. And our point of difference, why do we think we're good at selling properties? Well, we go to the same places then all the so-called larger agencies go to. We go to Trade Me, we go to Real Estate, we go to Hogarth and the Chinese side. But then our unfair advantage we have over the larger agencies is we have tens of thousands of investors that don't even know their property's on the market until we tell them. Yes. And then by default, if we get investors versus a home buyer, we're going to get the best price. And that's what we can do for you as a seller of a property, and that's primarily what we want to do. You know, sometimes we have properties and buyers and we put them together. But I think
you never obviously act for both sides because you can't do that.
No, it'll be a great model, but I don't want to end up in the clink, and I like sleeping at night, which I do.
Yeah, so you're either a seller's agent, like a normal real estate agent. You can list and sell people's houses, and you distribute that to your database.
Yep. And
you've got a whole bunch of investors in your database that buy the houses. Yep. So you've got that, which is your primary model these days.
Yep.
And as a secondary model, you have a buyer's agency where you will buy properties for a fee.
Yep.
And act for the purchaser and beat up the vendor because you're on the buyer's side when you're doing that.
Yep.
And try and get a better deal for the investor, and also use your property knowledge to steer them into the better properties.
Absolutely, and sometimes I'm getting calls every day now from people that want to join us as a buyer's agency service, and I'll say, that's nice, you could give us some money, but we've actually got some properties in Christchurch or Auckland or wherever it might be, or Queenstown, that actually suits what you're after now. So we can't take money from both sides. We've already got a great property for you.
Just
have a look
this.
at this.
Yeah.
And that's a common feature that's happening right in the market as we speak. So that, without going on for 2 hours, like I could talk about my business, which I'd like to.
Well, there's better deals around.
Another day we might do that.
There's better deals around at the moment.
Yeah, but what I am going to do coming up very shortly is I am going to have either it's going to be a monthly or weekly property of the month or properties of the month, and sit down with you and you listen to me, you know me, and I'll sit down and say, hey, this is why I think this property is something special. And it's not going to suit all the listeners. Everyone's after something different. But it'll just, sometimes you see a property and yes, it looks good or looks bad, but you don't really know what's in behind the property. So we'll look at doing that to make things easier for the listeners there.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, but one of the things I really quite passionate about, and we've been looking at different angles since July last year, has been how do we get investors into property with the new LVR rules. New builds, 20% on a lot of them, deposit only, creates opportunity, and that's really what we're going to sit down and talk about now coming up. And we're going to talk about the benefits of it and also what to look out for, because there are a lot of pitfalls and problems you have to look out for and can go wrong when you do a new build. So that's what Matthew and I will talk about soon.
Very good.
So welcome along to this video. Now you've come to this video today because either you're looking at a new build, you want some information on a new build, advantages, and maybe if there are pitfalls about new builds, which there are. So what we're trying to do today, we're going to educate you a little on things to look out for, or what's really going to enhance maybe your portfolio that you're trying to build at the moment. With me today I have Matthew Gilligan from Gilligan Rowan Associates. Hello Matthew.
Hello Mark.
And I got Matthew along because one, he's very, very experienced in property, owns a lot of property himself. He has an accountancy firm that specialises in property, and it's good to have a chat like this with someone else with a lot of wisdom in this, and he's been through different markets, creating new builds as well as buying new builds. So he's a good person to have sitting beside me talking to you today. So before we even start, what is a new build? We're talking about off-the-plan apartments or townhouses, and many of you might be looking at that right now, and that's why you're here, as I said. Buying a section and building a new place, or buying a land and home package. So that's really what we're talking about and discussing in today's video. So let's talk about the advantages to start off with, and we'll do the good first. And see if we can educate you in some way. So one thing is, especially right now, one of the reasons we're doing this at Property Ventures is when the new LVR rules come in last year and investors had to put 40% into property, that stopped a lot of people, in particular newer investors. So with new builds generally, you can get 80% lending, only having to put 20% in. There are some variants of that. In fact, I just got told the other day, in some cases you can put less than that in. Sometimes you have to put 30% in on that. So I see that as one of the advantages right now, and really why we've created this video. Any comments on that there, Matthew? Yeah.
Well, Reserve Bank, obviously wanting to ice down the Auckland property market and the wider property market nationally, brought in 60% LVRs. And they widened them to be New Zealand wide, so rather than being a regional restriction on Auckland, they became a national restriction. So it's made it very difficult for people who want to inflate, larger property portfolios. And of course, if you're buying new builds, you mentioned it before, it's such an advantage that you get 80% finance on a new build. Even if it's an investment property, you still get the 80% LVR. So you're only having to put down a 20% deposit as opposed to second-hand housing stock, which is going to be a 40% deposit.
Yeah, on a $600,000 buy, obviously 120 versus 240, big difference, especially if you're a newbie investor or
massive difference. Yeah, incidentally, something I've seen a lot of new investors, they seem to be doing it. I can't endorse this, of course, but I've observed them doing it. People will buy a new build on a 90% loan or something of that nature to buy it as their family home.
Yep.
So they get their first home, and I've noticed it's a bit of a recurring trend where they'll live in that house for a while and then move out and with a different bank buy a second home. And with that second bank, they can get 10% deposits, 90% finance, and their existing house with the other bank can sit there 90% geared. And that seems to be very common at the moment.
That is.
So
I think it's two properties you can actually buy as your own home, I believe, with 90%.
Right. Well, that's
something to talk about your mortgage broker about.
It is, yeah, and I think that's slightly different again. I think I'm just talking about people gaming the rules.
Right. Yeah.
because of course you can have a batch, a holiday home.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying do it. I'm just smiling, saying I'm observing it being done.
No, definitely people doing that right as we speak.
Yeah. They seem to buy a new home every year and leave the other one with their first bank 90% geared. So they're effectively getting 90% finance.
Yeah, and if you're unsure about that or don't quite understand, email us or talk to your mortgage broker
Go to a
about
mortgage broker.
that.
Yeah.
So that's all good. So the 20%, and it's 20%, it can actually be slightly more or less you have to put into a new build, depending on what it is and depending on your situation. I've been told by Chris Peterson Mortgages the other day, a mortgage broker.
Another thing I like about new builds is there's normally a delayed settlement element to them, so it's typically 5 to 8 months to build a house, and if the developer's early stage getting resource consents, it could be 12 to 24 months before the house is actually delivered.
Yep.
So if you're investing in an area that's in a rising market, for example, at the moment Wellington's in a rising market, Queenstown's in a rising market at the time this video is being shot, and Auckland's cooling off. So if you do off the plans new builds in those rising markets, you set your price now, maybe a 5% deposit, and as the market goes up, you get all of that increase in value between signing the contract and settlement, and that can assist you with your finance.
And of course, you've only for a deposit, you only have to put 10% in when you sign the contract. So if you've only put 60,000 in for a $600,000 property, it rises by at least that or more.
Of course, the counterpoint is if the market turns around, it goes down, you're then suffering that loss.
And that's one of the things to be aware of. And as you said, you look at what market you're in, and Wellington, Queenstown, for example, still going quite okay at the moment. When at the height of the market, you just have to be a wee bit more careful, or see, are you buying market value or are you buying slightly under market value? Some areas of New Zealand you can buy under market value for an off-the-plan build. That takes a lot of the risk out, of course, of that.
Yeah, and it's all about timing, isn't it? Auckland tends to boom first, and then the regions, the other main centres boom second, and then it ripples out to the regions. And it's pretty random, it seems, but the one thing that is true of all property cycles is Auckland kicks off first and goes up the fastest, becomes really unaffordable, and because it's so unaffordable, people get pushed out of Auckland, so they start moving to the regions. So that ripple effect then puts inflation into the regions. So that means maybe Auckland's peaked now. It's not the best time to buy Auckland off the plans, but certainly there's, I think, opportunity in places like Queenstown and Wellington, which are further behind.
And of course, if you do get that 10% growth or whatever while you're waiting, whether it's 6 months or 2 years for your new build to be completed, I guess at nearer the time it gives you choice, because especially if it's 2 years, circumstances change. If you've made 10%, you can either, if you did want to sell, and you have to still pay tax on that, of course, if you did, there's an opportunity there to make some money. Or if it has risen 10%, well, that's great. You have 10% less deposit you have to pay when you actually settle the property. So that you can turn that back around.
And you need to keep your eye on tax there, because if your intention is to sell, you'll have to pay income tax. And if you continuously and regularly do that, you'll have to pay GST. And paying GST is fraught with risk, because if the vendor to you is GST registered and you are deemed to be GST registered because your intention is to sell and you do it on multiple occasions, then of course when you sell you want to claim GST and pay GST and just pay GST on the difference. But if you're registered and the vendor's registered, then you're deemed zero rated. So if you've paid $1 million for it, including GST, that actually means $1 million plus GST.
Yes, so my advice on that will be, if the vendor, the developer's always going to be GST registered. So if you are GST registered and you are trading a property, make sure that you
take advice.
Talk to the agent, or talk to us, or talk to your accountant about the what can go wrong with that, because you can severely go wrong. But if you're a developer, you should know that. I've had clients brought 4 or 5 new builds from me, from apartments to standalone townhouses all around the country. She's from New Plymouth, and she just buys new builds, and she banks on getting that 10% growth. In some cases, she's had more than that for one she's bought from us, and she keeps it. That's what she does. She gets appreciation. She does.
So there's zero risk tax wise in that.
Yeah.
But we've seen some interesting examples at Gilligan Row where people have been buying a house off the plans, selling it, and that in itself, if you did it once and it was a genuine change of intention and the bright line rules didn't apply because you settled after 2 years, that would wash with IRD, but we meet taxpayers who come to us with problems when they're fighting with IRD, who have perhaps done that 4 or 5 times. And IRD will come in and they'll say, look at this, in the last 4 years you've had 5 properties, you seem to buy them and turn them over. Before the Bright Line rules we couldn't see you, now we can see you, and we've investigated you more thoroughly and we've found these 5 transactions. And so what they do, Mark, is they go back to the beginning and they say, right back at the beginning, you're deemed to be GST registered. And then they say, well, okay, for that first transaction that you paid, by example, $1 million for it, you want to claim 130,000 GST out of it, and we see you sold it, say, for, I don't know, 1.1 million. So say they want to pay GST on 1.1, claim GST on 1, the difference is 100 grand, they should be paying GST effectively of about 13,000 on the difference. Yeah. But because the vendor is GST registered to you, and you're deemed to be GST registered retrospectively, the IRD say, we say you should have been registered, then that transaction becomes deemed 0 rated. And what that means is, including GST of 1 million means 1 million plus GST effectively. You don't get to claim GST on it. So when you sell for 1.1, you have to pay GST on 1.1, which is 130 plus 143, near enough, 143,000, and you don't get to claim GST. So you'd actually lose 143,000.
Absolutely.
Just off the GST. And so deemed retrospective registration is very dangerous if you are a person dabbling in buying and selling. Be careful there.
Yeah. No, definitely. And that's one of the reasons we've got Matthew here to talk about, as I said, things to be aware of and the advantages of it.
Yeah, just be really careful with
tax. If you're a new
tax.
investor and you're going to buy, you're buying one of these, a new build to keep forever and ever, hey, you're okay. But as soon as you do start trading now or in the future, as Matthew said, you have to be very aware.
On a positive note, of course, with new builds, you've got generally an identifiable larger chattel component.
Yes, yeah.
Carpets, curtains, heat pumps, stoves, that sort of stuff. And you can identify that.
Add on to that, as well as the chattels, if you buy quite often a new apartment off the plans might be a furnished apartment, there might be $20,000, $30,000 worth of furniture.
Yes.
That can also be...
so you get to depreciate this. So whereas building depreciation is now 0, and land, of course, has always been 0. So if you just buy a second-hand house and you don't have any chattels, you don't get any tax benefit from the chattels. And you could do a chattel valuation and get one on a second-hand house, but most people don't, and they don't value up that well. For a new house, you can actually say, well, that heat pump was $6,000, that carpet was $6,000, stove was $2,000. It all adds up very quickly, and you get a decent tax benefit from that. So a new build does have that advantage.
Yeah, we've got example one in Queenstown we're just about to listen. I think it's $28,000 depreciation the first year. Obviously, it's a very short-lived period of time. The depreciation goes for 3 years, is it, or 4 years?
Depends on the asset.
Yeah, it depends on the asset,
yeah,
on what they are. But I consider that to be a really, if you use the money wisely, that's a very big part of new builds right now. If you're getting $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 back that first year and 8 the second and 4 the third year, you can squander that money, or you can put it into another property, or you can actually pay it off against the debt. And if you pay that gives you more equity in the property, gives you a more safety margin, enables you to buy something else if you want to, and at the same time your cash flow becomes better because you owe less debt, you're getting the same cash flow. So it all depends on, there's been so many ways to teach how to do property in the last 10 years. It used to be leverage 100% and never pay debt off. And a lot of people got caught out there within the last 10 years. So if you can pay debt off with that depreciation the first 4 years, and when you buy an investment property, you should have a maintenance plan, and it might be $2,000 a year towards a maintenance or whatever it might be, which is a good safety margin to have. You always need to do maintenance on an older property in particular. If you go, hey, I've got a new property for the first 3 or 4 years, there's going to be very little maintenance. Again, allocate that money somewhere and put it again on the principal. If you do that for 4 years,
you can borrow
you've
it
got
back.
a massive head start, haven't you, Matthew, if that's the case?
Yeah, you can borrow it back. It's just good commercial sense, isn't it, to do that?
Something I never got taught when I first went to Property 101 years ago, 15 years ago.
I don't touch any of the cash flow coming off my rents. My rent roll at the moment is about 1.1, so I've got a decent decent rent roll coming in, and it's well positive cash flow. I don't touch any of it. I just drive it back into debt.
Yes,
because people get paranoid about paying off debt. you reduce the debt. When you see another investment that you want to make, you go to the bank and borrow the money back. They'll give you the money. Banks don't take the money and run. They'll say, oh, well done, you're reducing principal, you've got surplus cash.
Yeah.
And if you put that in the bank, you're getting very low interest rate on it. If you reduce debt, then your reduction of cost is your cost of funds, which is higher than the amount that you would receive. So I think that's smart. Listen, just another thing I've noticed, a few dodgy developers, I'd describe them as, around, and I've seen clients getting caught in transactions where they're basically buying off the plans in areas that are overcapitalised, or the developers don't seem to complete the developments because they run out of finance, or they just, for whatever reason, decide not to do the development.
Yep.
What advice would you give to an investor there?
Yeah, well, my first point I really got to things to be aware of. We talked about some of the benefits financially and what you can actually gain from doing it and paying less money out, and all the good practices we sort of spoke about. But yeah, one of the biggest things, and I've had personal experience with this, with good and bad, is look at a developer's experience. If you think yourself, if you're out there now and you've done a small renovation, for example, maybe you've done 5 renovations or 5 developments or whatever you may have done, what's happened during those 5 renovations? You've improved every single time. You now look for better property, you now look for better location, you now look for better facilities around the area, schooling and infrastructure and what have you, and you get better with the figures. So if you use a developer, I personally had a very bad experience about 12 years ago when I was a little less experienced, and it was with a developer with no experience at all, and I went and brought off the plan. So there's various things that happen with that, but of course, as I said, if you must go with an experienced developer, so do a bit of research on the developer or what they have done. Is this their first one ever? Be careful. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
And how do you protect yourself against a developer, say, sitting there indefinitely and not doing anything?
Yeah, and that's one of the things where I did get, 2 things I still could have got out of it after this, but I didn't. I hadn't met anyone like yourself to get me out of the situation I had back then. But what you can do is you have a thing called a sunset clause, and if anyone buys an off-the-plan build, you must 100% have a sunset clause. Sunset clause is the schedule of the development is to finish in 1 September this year. So 1 September they're saying it should finish. There are always hold-ups, no matter how good the developer is, whether it's through the council or subbies, there's always
Well, I think those sunset clauses say they've got to break ground and meet certain milestones, don't they?
They do.
So if they have triggered those, then it's fair enough. You know that it's real and you can see settlements coming. But if you get 18 months, 24 months down the track,
the market's turned. You're buying a place worth $400,000 or $600,000 is now only worth $550.
Yeah.
And it's taken 18 months longer to build, as Matthew just said.
Yeah.
You have to settle this property, so you're up for lose. You're going to buy the property and lose
50 grand
straight away.
Yeah.
Not a good look. And I have experienced this, and again, inexperienced developer didn't have it. A good developer will always have a sunset clause anyway.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be a month after the schedule finish. It will be 6 months to 18 months to a year to 2, depending on the development size, depending on how far away.
Yeah, it protects both parties, because if something's going wrong with the developer, everyone needs to get out.
Yep.
And if the developer's dragging the chain and acting inappropriately for whatever reason, you've got the ability to terminate the contract and run and get your deposit back, because he hasn't started the development and broken ground effectively.
Or you can still carry on if you want to. So it gives you, the buyer, the choice. So it goes forever, and you go, this is not what we signed up for. You can, as Matthew said, you cancel the contract, get your full deposit back, carry on, or you can go, hey, I'll hang around for a wee bit longer. It's not that far away. We've made good money while we've been waiting. And so sunset clause, 100%, make sure it's on the contract. Finance has got particularly hard. You might know more about this than me, Matthew, and it used to be you could sign up a 2-year off the plan deal and you knew you'd get finance 2 years down the track. Not quite like that at the moment.
Yeah, there's a lot of credit rationing going on.
Talk about the banks. Why is this happening? Why are the banks not lending how they were 2 years ago?
Yeah, well, there's capital adequacy ratios on the banks themselves. The banks are now having to operate as effectively independent subsidiaries. They used to be able to get a loan from their foreign from the head office, and that would count as capital. But now the banks have got to be, to the individual branches in New Zealand, have to make certain balance sheet tests to be allowed to do business in New Zealand, or they face penalties with the Reserve Bank. So that requires, instead of a loan from the parent, capital to be introduced, so that if the bank becomes insolvent, that money that the banks put in as capital gets burnt before the deposit holders get burnt. So those capital adequacy ratios are burning banks because there are new requirements that are biting, particularly this year forwards for the banks. So that's required more liquidity, more money to be put in by the banks at a time when the big banks in New Zealand, which have Australian parents, are under pressure in Australia because they've got some development finance settlement failure going on over there. A lot of the Aussie property has been sold to Chinese investors. Chinese investors can't get cash out of China at the moment, and there's no foreign buyer finance. So these apartments and developments have been done assuming that the Chinese can bring money to Australia and then borrow locally on whatever the ratio was. But neither of those things are true. Suddenly they can't get money out, they can't borrow and get foreign buyers finance.
And unfortunately, in hindsight, that's then affecting our lending in New Zealand.
So Australia's suddenly
relationship with
got this
Australia
wall
banks.
of settlement failure, which means that capital is not released back into the banking system to flow into New Zealand for new builds. So you're seeing the developers in Auckland, a lot of developments getting put on hold or cancelled. It's been prominent in the press this year in 2017, and that's why, because there's actually credit rationing going on for property development finance. And at the investor level, 60% LVRs, tighter market, flattening market, more conservatism from the banks, and pressure on their balance sheets from capital adequacy ratios, all of that's leading to a tighter finance market. Yeah.
So if you're in the market too...
Not a bad thing though, because Auckland was just silly high. We were hitting $1 million, and we'd sort of...
This is what's kept the market at a... Compared with 10 years ago, the property market where it had the big crash, it's probably saving the big crash this time around of the...
But we didn't have a big crash because, Auckland didn't. Auckland went down 4%, and if you went into the regions that crashed hard, well, they crashed hard for a reason, because they were speculating in inflating asset values in areas with bad fundamentals. No population growth, loose supply, poor employment fundamentals. Those areas are always going to crash. They'll crash again this cycle if interest rates spike.
Yeah, another story another day. But listen to our podcast where we've spoken about that before.
Yes, so stay in the areas with best employment fundamentals, tight supply. And Auckland went down 4% last cycle to the bottom of the GFC. If you take a rolling 90-day average of quarterly medians, which is what I'm talking about here, we went down 4% on a rolling 90-day average, which was spectacularly low volatility. We lacked volatility in Auckland, whereas some areas in Whangarei, for example,
40% on
50% plus. The investor parts of Whangarei, and a lot of small towns through New Zealand experienced that volatility. So if you're going to do this new build off the plans, do it in good areas, don't do it in dodgy areas.
Yeah, do it in good areas, and on the personal level, see a mortgage broker that understands new builds too. Don't see a bank or a mortgage broker that doesn't really deal with new builds, because you only have your finance for so long, and you have to know how long that is, and you have to look at your own personal situation as your wife about how you're going to start a family in the next wee while, and things will change. So talk to a mortgage broker that will tell you and inform you of where it is, and it'll alleviate some of those personal problems and issues sort of coming up.
Good.
So this it's just a wee introduction. What we've you've just, those who are listening to this, so this is fresh on the page. We've got our new page now for Property Ventures on new builds. We don't want to throw any old property on that page that every other man and his dog's got. Yes, sometimes there'll be a double up with other agencies, but we want to put product that are on there. If every investor's coming from a different angle, what they're trying to achieve, capital gains, cash flow, whatever it might be, long term versus short term. But what we want to do, we want to put a property on there that will suit one of those criteria. If it's something that we just think there's issues or problems with it, and who am I to really judge, but I want good properties on our site. We're not going to put Joe average properties out there if we can help it. We're not mind readers in the future.
But what you're saying is you're selecting the better stock from the market.
And we have got a couple sources of how we get new property. but we only want to put the cream of the cream on there. We deal with our investors like this every day of the week through our podcast and video series. We want to keep that relationship going positively, and hopefully we can do that by having good property.
Yeah, and also you're pre-selecting developers that are reputable, that actually do perform, that have a track record.
Had personal history, Matthew, of developments not going, a new build's not going well by inexperienced developers, and we don't want it. I don't want to pass it on to my buyers. Why would I?
I've had them. 12, 13 years ago, I bought a house, basically 100 apartments in Simon's Hobson Street, 188 Hobson Street, and my idea was buy the 100 apartments, flick on 90, keep 10, pay the tax on the profit on the 90, but bought them wholesale, sold them, semi-retail, and the margin off the 90 that I sold I would put into the 10 that I kept. So I did this with a mate, and we worked very hard. It was a lot of work, and we actually sold something like 85 of the apartments and ended up with 15 unsold. So we were very happy, and we had a nice margin. There was a bit for the investor, a bit for us. So having done everything, deposits paid, all the legal work done, paid for all of that, and we were waiting patiently. The developer cancelled the contract and started a new company, moved it across and developed it in the new company. Why did he do that? Because the assets, the values of the apartments went up significantly, and our investors who bought them off us were getting the benefit of that, so it was a win-win in our group, but they just wanted to pinch the development off us, so they cancelled it and moved it to another company. And they actually were good enough to pay us out some commission. They took about 10 contracts, but they cancelled the rest, and it cost us a lot of money and wasted our time. So
that's why you go with a company that, because there were stories of companies like that out there doing that.
I know that developers, I'll never buy or deal with them again.
So we like to take some of the guesswork out by pre-selecting developers that we know are equitable, good operators and
that's
work
right.
well. So
yeah.
So anything parting words, Matthew, and I'll.
I think 2017 is an election year. Election year is always a flat year for property. As we get closer to the election, people will be scared, and they'll be scared that there'll be tax changes if Labor gets in, capital gains tax, that sort of stuff, and just potential change of government always scares the market. So as that fear and uncertainty comes into the market, it's actually really good buying opportunity that comes out of it. Because nothing has changed fundamentally. Auckland still has a supply problem. Nobody's building at the moment because you can't get development finance. So Auckland's still a great place to invest, but you have to choose carefully. You have to get wholesale stuff. And you can actually get wholesale stuff when people are fearful. And I think we're heading into that market. I'm seeing really good buys around, and I've started buying again. Rest of the country still cycling behind. Some areas not so much. Some areas are closer to Auckland's growth. So if I was leaving Auckland for new builds, I would be into the areas that are cycling further back. In other words, they haven't had the lift, because historically they've actually caught up. Ripple effect catches them up.
Yep.
So that would be Wellington, would be first choice, Hamilton second choice, Queenstown just because it's so tight for supply. Having said that, Queenstown is a bit of bust town. So.
Has been in the past, but one story about Queenstown, 10 years ago it was when the last cycle peaked, it was a winter destination, holiday destination. Moved forward 10, 12 years, it's now an all-year-round destination.
It is, yeah, it is.
And it's changing. We heard of the airports looking being extended and direct flights to China in the next 2 to 5 years. How good is that going to be?
China is going to drive New Zealand, there's no question. Yeah.
Anyway, again,
it's exciting for investors. Yeah,
absolutely exciting.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening to the video today. I hope it's helped you. Any queries you have, we're always free to answer anything you may send to us at info@propertyventures.co.nz. And apart from that, have a wonderful day and happy investing.
Thanks for listening.